So you've been working in this industry long enough to see it evolve in real time. And I think there's a lot we've just kind of accepted without really questioning it out loud. So I want to start by asking you, do you think the photography and videography industry has adapted to the way people use media today? I really don't think it has, at least not fundamentally. You know, we've changed how things look and how we present them, but not really the core ideas behind them. What do you mean by that? So the industry learned how to format content for modern platforms, but not how to rethink the way people interact with media today. Now, at its core, the industry still operates like creators control access to content, but that's not how media works anymore. Photos and videos are fluid now, you know, they're posted and reposted, clipped, stitched into other content, circulated constantly. So you think the issue is less about the work itself and more about the structure around it? Exactly. You know, I think we're still using an old idea of control in a culture that doesn't understand nor value that. And I think the longer that disconnect exists, the harder it becomes for people to understand why the industry operates the way it does. At some point, we have to ask whether we're actually protecting the craft or we're protecting a system that no longer matches reality. Do you think people value photography and videography less now, or do they just value different things than creators do? I think creators confuse changing values with losing value, because media has never been more important than it is right now, right? Businesses grow through media, trends and ideas spread because of media. It becomes part of how people connect and express themselves every single day. Then why do you think so many creators feel undervalued? Because a lot of creators still tie value to difficulty. How hard something was to make, how expensive the gear was, how technical the process was. But isn't that part of what professional work is? It used to be a much bigger part of it, yeah. But easier access changed everything. Like high quality media isn't rare anymore. So people care more about things like convenience, control, how fast they can get it, authenticity, emotional connection, storytelling. And I think the industry has struggled with that change because it's disrupting the old system. And instead of adapting to what people value now, the industry is trying to hold on to the old idea of what made media valuable. Do you think creators today are competing more with each other or with how easy it's become to create content in general? I think we're competing with accessibility itself. You know, the barrier to creating media content is essentially non-existent. You know, everybody has a phone. Editing tools are easy to use. AI is dominating the space. Do you think that scares the industry? I think it destabilizes the industry, because photography and videography historically built value around access, you know, access to gear, access to knowledge, access to distribution. But now everyone can participate. So what makes professionals matter now? I think that's the question the industry still hasn't fully answered, or maybe doesn't want to fully accept. Because if the answer is just better visuals, I don't think that's enough anymore. It's not enough anymore. I think professionals have to offer more than just creating something that looks good. I mean, an 8-year-old can create something that looks good. The harsh reality is being a great photographer or videographer isn't enough anymore. And doing things the old way because that's how it's always been done isn't gonna cut it. Do you feel like the industry still prices media based on how it used to work rather than how content functions now? Yeah, absolutely. You know, a lot of pricing structures still come from a world where media was slower to produce, it was harder to distribute, and it was much easier to control. And you don't think that reflects today anymore? Not really. You know, we live in a nonstop content economy now. You know, brands and businesses need content all the time. People expect things to be fast and flexible. Media moves quicker than it ever has. But couldn't someone argue that lowering those barriers devalues the craft? I actually think refusing to adapt is what's devaluing the craft. When clients don't understand why pricing is structured a certain way, or why they can't fully use what they pay for, or why ownership feels limited or non-existent, the process starts to feel frustrating. And once an industry is seen as friction rather than something useful, people naturally start looking for other options. Blockbuster didn't fold because people stopped wanting movies. It folded because the experience became friction heavy, and that opened the door for Netflix. So speaking of opening doors, do you think creators are encouraged to make their work more accessible or more protected? And definitely more protected. Most industry conversations still revolve around protecting ownership, protecting usage, protecting rights. But isn't that necessary? To a degree, sure. I'm not saying creators shouldn't protect their work, but there's a limit. And past that limit, protection can start to diminish how relevant the work becomes. How so? Because modern media culture rewards participation, right? Sharing, reach, visibility, adaptability. And I think creators sometimes confuse openness with devaluation. Like if something becomes too accessible, it loses worth. But culturally, a lot of the most impactful visual media became impactful because it spread freely and became part of larger conversations. So the question becomes whether the industry is protecting creative work itself or holding on to an outdated business model that's becoming harder to maintain. Do you feel like ownership still plays the same role in media that it used to? No, I really don't. Ownership still matters legally, obviously, but culturally, I think its role has changed a lot. In what way? Well, I think the industry still treats ownership like the center, the core of value. It still focuses on who owns the content, while the broader culture is more concerned with how easily the content can be used and shared and spread. So you think there's a disconnect between industry standard and what people expect? Completely, because when someone pays for media and then immediately runs into restrictions around how they can use it, share it, monetize it, that changes how they emotionally experience the value of the service itself. And I think creators and the industry heavily underestimate that reaction. Most people aren't thinking in terms of licenses or legal rights. They're thinking, I pay for this, why does it still feel restricted? And whether the industry agrees with that or not, ignoring that gap is becoming harder to justify over time. When someone pays for photography or videography, do you think clients and creators are actually expecting the same thing anymore? I honestly think they're often having two completely different conversations. Most clients assume they're paying for content that they can use however they want, while creators are thinking in terms of licensing and limits on how that content can be used. So where do you think that disconnect comes from? I think both sides are operating from completely different assumptions. Clients are thinking, I hired you to create something for me and I'll use it however I see fit. Creators are thinking, I'm creating something for you, but you can only use it how I say you can use it, and you may have to pay me more money depending upon how you want to use it. And you think that's becoming a problem? It's already a problem. It's already a problem. When people keep walking away from projects feeling confused about what they can do with the work, or restricted in how they can use it, or like the final result isn't what they thought they paid for, they eventually stop seeing professional photography and videography as something that helps them. And instead, it just starts to feel complicated and frustrating. And in a world where everything else is fast and simple and easy to access, complicated systems usually won't survive, and our industry isn't going to be some rare exception to that. If people are struggling to see the value in photography and videography more and more, what do you think the industry is still holding on to? The craft, control, exclusivity. And you think those things are outdated now? I think they're becoming less aligned with how media works today. We live in a world where it's easy for anyone to create content, and people are constantly involved in sharing and interacting with it. So what happens if the industry doesn't adapt? People will continue needing media more than ever, but they're going to stop seeing us as necessary to get it. And that's the part I think the industry needs to take seriously, because I don't think photography and videography are losing value at all. I think media is becoming more important every year. I think what's becoming outdated is the idea that value comes mainly from restricting access in a world that now fundamentally runs on openness and accessibility. So if you had to be honest about where the industry actually needs to change, what would you say? Rethink why it still makes sense to own media that someone has paid you to create. Stop focusing on protecting your art and start focusing on delivering what your client actually needs. Stop assuming that good-looking media is the most important part of the job. Understand that the value of your time means nothing if no one is willing to pay for it. Accept that what we do is no longer a necessity. People make a choice to hire us when they see value in it. People used to pay $20 for an album. Nobody would expect that model today. Stop expecting people to keep paying for media they don't fully own and can't freely use. Mr. Toglife, I appreciate your time. Thank you, sir.